All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to look today at some new notes on multiplying fractions. So you should be wrapped up with the first two sections now on adding and subtracting fractions. And so now we're going to go ahead and look at multiplying. So again, hopefully multiplying is not something that's completely new with fractions for you. Hopefully you've seen it. We're just going to refresh our memory and then we're going to build on it and add in the new things from this year. So here's a multiplication problem. Now remember, we're not going to write our multiplication with an x anymore. We're not going to see that very often. So we're going to see it more as parentheses, or you might even see it as a little dot. But in this case, the way I read this is since there's no sign in between here, just parentheses, this is negative 3/4 times 2/3. And so as we go through these, we're going to add in those negatives. So you have to remember the rules of multiplying. So remember, if there's two positives multiplied, the answer is positive. If you have one negative, whether it's the last one or whether you have one negative and it's the first one, no matter what, if there's one negative, the answer is negative. And if there's two negatives, the answer is positive. So right away, I can tell that this answer, since there's one negative here and not here, the answer is going to be negative. And so that's something that we have to remember from this year. And then we just do the multiplying like we've done previously. So remember, when you multiply, we multiply just straight across. This isn't cross multiplying. That's different. Multiplying, you just multiply straight across. And so in this case, I would do 3 times 2. And so 3 times 2 gives me 6. And then on the bottom, I would do 4 times 3, and 4 times 3 gives me 12. Good. And so my answer is negative 6/12. Now, you may want to box that and say that this is my answer, but be careful. Remember, there are some times where we need to simplify fractions. And so in this case, if I get 6/12, I notice that, well, this is an even number and this is an even number. So it looks like this might be able to simplify. And so remember, we talked previously about saying to ourselves, if this is 1 on a number line and this is 0, we need to compare and say, well, here's 1/2. Where does 6/12 fall? Is it like in here? Is it in here? And so I need to kind of simplify this and make sure I understand where it is. So if I cut a pizza into 12 slices and I give you 6 of them, well, that's exactly half. 6 is exactly half of 12. So whenever I simplify this, I could divide the top and bottom by the same thing. I could divide them both by 6, since they're both divisible by 6. And as long as we do the same thing top and bottom, we're okay. And so 6 divided by 6 is 1, and 12 divided by 6 is 2. And so on a number line, 6/12 would have been the correct answer. That would have gone right here. But in simplest form, that is 1/2. 6 out of 12 is 1 out of 2. 1/2 is the correct final answer. So don't forget how to simplify fractions. Make sure that you just divide the same thing on the top and bottom if that ever happens to you. Good. So that's the stuff we need to recall. If you go into IXL has some great lessons on this, and you can practice and you can know whether you're getting the questions right or wrong right away. Good. So moving on to the kind of story problems. Story problems are what Edgenuity likes by now. You may have seen that. And so here is an example of a story problem. So this says that Jeff got 4 bags of grapes at 15 1/3 ounce each. That's what OZ's ounce. How many ounces of grapes did he buy? And so this word is one that I'd like you to underline, and that is each. So this word each, and there's actually another one that you could say, and we'll put it here as well, per. I'm going to put it in quotation marks. So there's two words that we're going to be looking for in these word problems, and that is each or per. And each or per both kind of give me a picture of what's going on here. So just if I'm going to draw this out, Jeff got 4 bags of grapes at 15 1/3 ounce each. So 4 bags, 1, 2, 3, 4, at 15 1/3 ounce each. Or they could have said that there is 15 1/3 ounce per bag. And that would mean that each one of these, this is 15 1/3, this is 15 1/3, and so is the other two, are the same thing. And so we could take all 4 of those bags and put them together into one giant bag. And so whenever we see these words each or per, there's only 2 options. It could either be division, we're splitting it up into 4 bags, or it could be multiplication. We're taking 4 bags and we're putting them all together to one giant bag. And so if I try and picture this picture, this looks like we're doing multiplication. We're taking the 15 1/3 and we're multiplying it by 4. And so if you see these words, always try and picture it, and then you can determine whether it's multiplying or dividing. So we're going to try out this multiplication problem and see what we can do. So this is 4 times 15 1/3. And so we have to remember a couple things that we've learned about in elementary school. There's a few tricks here. So the first trick is, if we're going to multiply fractions, we'd really like it to look like this, where we have a fraction times another fraction, and there's not other numbers or whole numbers. So we don't want mixed numbers, we don't want whole numbers. If we're multiplying fractions, we'd like it to just be one fraction, one on top of the other, times one fraction, one on top of the other. So I need to figure out ways to do that, because this is not a fraction, that's a whole number, and this is not a fraction because it's a mixed number. So I need to figure out ways to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I'm going to say that 4, well, I can make 4 into a fraction by doing this little trick. And this little trick is, if I do 4 over 1, that's the same as 4. 4 is the same as 4 divided by 1, because 4 divided by 1 is just 4. So I can do that. That's legal. You can just put a 1 under anything and it'll make it a fraction. Now, you might want to put a 1 under this, like that, but that's not actually going to help us any, because I still have this mixed number on top. And so there's a different way actually that we take this mixed number and we turn it into a fraction. And that was maybe taught to you as around the world, or maybe taught to you in a different way. But the way we do that is we do 15 times 3. And so 15 times 3 is 30 plus 15, which is 45. And then 45 plus 1 is 46. So we learn that as you multiply these two numbers, 15 times 3, and then you add the 1 afterwards. But then that would be 46 and then over 3. And so now I have this set up like up here. It looks more complicated, but it's just a fraction times a fraction. And so now that I've done that, here we don't need common denominators. So it's okay that you have a 1 on the bottom of here and a 3 on the bottom here. That's okay in multiplication. We're not doing adding and subtracting anymore. So now I just need to do 4 times 46. And so off the top of my head, I might struggle, so you might want to grab a calculator. But 4 times 40 is 160. And then 4 times 6 is 24. So 160 plus 24, that would be 184. So 184 is on top when we multiply this times this. And then now we need to do down here, 1 times 3 is 3. And so now we have 184 over 3. And so that again is not a good answer because it's improper. And so we need to do some long division now. So I'll come up here to do my long division, give myself space. So this is 184 divided by 3. And so again, calculator can do part of this for you, but it'll give you decimal. 3 goes into 18 6 times. 6 times 3 is 18. So I subtract and I get 0. Don't forget, I've got to bring down my 4 now. And then I say, how many times does 3 go into 4? It goes in once. 1 times 3 is 3. I subtract and I get a remainder of 1. And so remember, in elementary school, we were okay to say 61 remainder 1. But once we get to middle school, we don't really do that anymore. So we're going to say it goes in there 61 whole times. But then since there's a remainder of 1, I'm going to say that there's a remainder of 1 out of 3. So I'm going to keep it as a mixed number here and use that remainder. So this remainder right here is what goes on the top of your fraction. And so the answer there would be 16 1/3. And don't forget, how many ounces of grapes did he buy? I need to label this as ounces. Excellent. Okay. Alright, so the very last thing we're going to look at here is actually a shortcut. So we know how to multiply things, but we're going to learn a shortcut using the distributive property. And this is going to be really helpful, I think, to trying to do this in your head and lean less on a calculator. Okay. So here's how we would do this from what we know. So this is how we know to do this. So again, the trick is we would rewrite this as 3 needs to change to a fraction, so 3 over 1, and times, now 5 1/4 needs to change to a fraction, so I do 5 times 4, and then I add 1. So 5 times 4 is 20, plus 1 is 21, and then I have over 4. Now you multiply straight across. So 3 times 21 gives me 63. 1 times 4 is 4. And so now I need to do my long division. So 63 divided by 4. 4 goes in there once. Subtract and I get 2. I bring down my 3. How many times does 4 go into 23? Well, 4 times 6 is 24. So that would make this 5. 5 times 4 is 20. I subtract now and I get a remainder of 3. And so after all of that, I now have that the answer to 63 divided by 4 is it goes in 15 whole times, and then there's a remainder of 3, and so that's what goes on the top of my fraction. 3 over my denominator is 4. And so the answer is 15 3/4. So you may need to pause the video because that's a long one and I went through it really fast. But those are all the steps, and it's a lot of steps you can see. And so what I'm really excited to show you now is this using the distributive property. We can do the exact same question using the distributive property, and it's actually a lot easier to do in our heads using the distributive property, and I'll prove it to you. So in this case, I would do much better if it wasn't a mixed number. And so what I'm going to kind of picture in my head is I'm going to rewrite this and say, well, wait a second. This is the same as 3 times 5 plus 1/4. I'm going to actually separate it as two things, because if I'm multiplying whole numbers, I'm better than doing mixed numbers and doing all this. So I'm going to separate it into two things. That's legal. 3 times 5 1/4 is the same as 3 times 5 plus 1/4. So 5 plus 1/4 is the same as 5 1/4. And so now if I distribute, this is actually a much easier problem to do in my head, because I actually know both of these in my head. 3 times 5 is 15, and 3 times 1/4 is 3/4. And so now the answer is going to be 15 plus 3/4, which is just 15 3/4. That was way quicker than doing it this way, the old way. And so using the distributive property is actually really, really helpful here. So just breaking it up into two things, doing multiplying by the 5 and then multiplying by the 1/4 is really, really helpful. And we could have done that up here as well with this question. We could have done 4 times 15, right? So in a calculator, if I typed in 4 times 15, or I'll do it here. So 4 times 15, that would have given me 30 times 2 is 90. So a calculator would get that for me. And then I could have added 4 times 1/3. I'm sorry, not 90, 60. So calculator would do that for you. 4 times 15 is 60, and then 4 times 1/3 is 4/3. And so the answer is 60 plus 4/3. And you might say, well, 4/3 is improper. That's 1 1/3. And so the answer is 60 plus 1 1/3, which is 61 1/3. And so this, using the distributive property, this might look like it makes it longer, but it's actually saving you tons of time doing all of this stuff. So the distributive property is going to come up. They're going to ask you, if this is your multiplication, how would you rewrite it? And the answer is you would rewrite it like this, so that it would end up being 3 times 5 plus 3 times 1/4.